Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Redemption in a Worthy World in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, Priorities. After nagging Crane and his successor, Cricket, Indra Uchiha had been allowed a pen and a stack of paper to write down as much actionable intelligence as possible. Inoichi had entered the room and set up his own desk in the darkest part of the room and a simple nod towards his former subject. They passed papers back and forth, but neither spoke, preferring the businesslike silence of the hospital. Every few hours Dr. Ontoba would enter, change out Indra's foreign chakra drips and glare suspiciously at both men. The rough housing of his patient had set back the man's recovery by a week at least, and the doctor had made Indra swear upon the graves of his ancestors to remain in bed until he was discharged. While most ninja routinely disregarded doctor's orders at any given opportunity, Indra stayed put. To be blunt, he remained in pain, even as the localized painkillers turned a throbbing chest into a dull ache as stitches and chakra slowly mended the wounds inflicted by the mysterious white arrowheads. The arrows and their owner had all vanished with no trace, along with Hagoromo, and this unsettled Indra to a great degree. To all intents and purposes the Otsutsuki and their descendants, the sage chief among them, had been worshipped as gods or extended into the realms of myth. The idea that any of them could come hurtling out of the sky or into his own mind would drive even a stable man to paranoia. At the moment, Indra was not an entirely stable man, and everyone in the hospital room knew it. He tried very hard to not focus on the things that caused him pain, burying himself in recalling every scrap of information on Orochimaru's village hidden in the sound, the personnel, the missions he'd been on, the Sunin's goals, both temporary and long-term. While the ninja had mellowed significantly after the Fourth Great Ninja War, Indra had only left the man alive out of pragmatism and a sneaking suspicion that he might one day be Konoha's ace in the hole. This had proven true when the Otsutsuki came, for sound alone took out two of the beings by burying them under twisted summons, half-human clones of Orochimaru, and curse-marked orphans of war. It had led to the annihilation of the land of rice paddies in addition to the Sound Village itself, but it had bought the Shinobi Alliance time to muster around the border of the Land of Fire. In the wars to come, Orochimaru would be and had proven himself useful. Indra had puzzled over what tense he should use when writing reports for Inoichi or whoever was reading these. He suspected the entire Konoha Council, but ultimately settled for the future tense. After all, to Indra and to the rest of the 5 Kage, none of these things had happened yet, nor, Amaterasu willing, would they. These were all the rational, logical arguments that Naruto, as the Hokage, had proposed after the war, and they sprang up again in Indra's head now. His emotional response was quite different. The emotional side of Indra Uchiha, the part that was mostly Sasuke, felt like chopping Orochimaru into pieces, burning them, then throwing those pieces into Kagaya's acid dimension was too good for the monster. He'd lived under Orochimaru's thumb for 3 years, and even now, decades later, he could still remember the smooth warmth of the man's skin as he ran a hand across Sasuke's cheek, or every snide, approving comment. For once, the cold of the hospital had nothing to do with his shiver. Those 3 years had been an exercise in contradiction. Train hard every day, but hide his true strength as much as possible. How hard he could hit, how fast he could run, how much chakra he could gather, all had to be hidden from anyone with a note on their headband. Every sliver of experience he managed to gain made the day of his reckoning come ever closer, the day Orochimaru would try to steal his body. He'd seen what had happened to other unfortunates, helped Kabuto drag their husks to the incinerator, or the kennels. He would try not to make eye contact with the medicnin or the empty eye sockets of the corpse because he'd never been sure which ones were more devoid of humanity. Kabuto himself had been playing the same game, of course, but he'd been better at it, had done it for longer. Some members of the Sound thought Kabuto was exempt from possession because he was too useful to Orochimaru alive. Others thought the silver-haired ninja was tolerated as Orochimaru's little joke, a pet that carried the potential to sting its master at any point, an incentive for the snake to stay aware. The test subjects just thought they were both the same sort of diseased, destructive doctors that cut and stitched and added and subtracted until their names, clans, and identities were gone. Sasuke had been one of those test subjects, on occasion. As Orochimaru's perfect vessel, he'd avoided the worst of it, the scalpels, the full replacement of what he'd been born with. But Orochimaru wasn't above a few additions, as he'd so harmlessly called them. 2 weeks strapped to a gurney as endless samples of venom were pumped through his veins, often in combination. He'd thrashed, gibbered, nearly bit his tongue off, and begged for death by the first Sunday. Of course, that wish had not been granted, and he'd endured another 7 days of bites, injections, and vile drinks forced down his throat via funnel. Ironically, that had been how he'd first met Karen. She would later tell him of their brief encounter in the Chunin exams, but Suzuki's first lasting impression of her was a brusque, no-nonsense woman with familiar chakra and vivid red hair. She'd fed him portions of her chakra while grumbling about other members of the Sound Village. These complaints weren't directed at him, she didn't even know who he was, just another test subject, but to him it was a lifeline. Those complaints reminded him there was something other than tests, pain, and a desire to survive in Otagakure. People had lives here. He could have a life here, if he survived. Orochimaru had been a part of that life, for good and ill. For every grueling experiment he'd participated in, there had been a new lesson as well. Personal Kenjutsu lessons from Orochimaru himself, a master of the art. The gift of the snake summoning contract, on his 15th birthday, offered with what seemed to be genuine pleasure. The shuriken storage tattoos on his wrists that had aided him against Itachi, a devilishly complicated bit of sealing jutsu he never would have accomplished on his own. Tutelage on the uses of his curse mark. A rare bottle of wine from the Land of Fire on the 2nd anniversary of his arrival in the Sound Village. None of it had been wholly altruistic, and every gift had been to prepare him to kill Itachi or become Orochimaru's new body. Indra knew the snake had been a monster, but he had been a monster still trying to reach out, after Orochimaru had torn out every shred of empathy the Sunin had ever possessed, a monster of his own creation. Even after everything, Indra still felt a thread of something. Not sympathy, but perhaps kinship. Recognition. Of how deeply he could have fallen if Naruto hadn't reached deep into that darkness and dragged him back out by the scruff of his neck. When Sasuke officially met Karen later on, dealing with a prison break in the southern compound, he hadn't been sure what to make of her, but he remembered that chakra and that hair. In the corner of a list of Sound members, he scribbled, Unite Uzumaki. It was small compensation for betraying Naruto repeatedly, stabbing Karen, and leaving them both to die in a world ruined by war. The least he could do was give them a family back. That started him on a roll. Every member of the Sound had come from somewhere, for Orochimaru had made a point of collecting the powerful, the strange, and the curious from across the small and great nations. Some of them like Karen, Suijutsu, and Yugo, had stayed in touch with him and he considered friends. Others, such as Orochimaru himself, Kabuto, and the few, psychotic pretenders to the titles of Sound Ninja 5, he'd always regarded as dangerous enemies. Most were simply victims of circumstance. Missing nin who needed somewhere to hang their hats, earn money, and hide from former comrades. Civilians from the land of rice paddies who sought protection or trading opportunities, only to find that the Otokage had use for them as well. Both security and trade were allowed, but always with a cost. Sasuke remembered one such cost. A merchant's daughter had gotten involved with one of the Chunin under his command and it hadn't ended well. She had fled with the child and the Chunin followed them both to the land of grass to retrieve her. Sasuke had been sent to retrieve the man and his family, with instructions to. Indra shook himself out of Sasuke's memories and focused on the paper in front of him. He'd written the man's name, Rukin Satabo, originally from the Sand Village. He had no idea if the man was even a missing nin yet. He'd been older than Sasuke, but had treated him with respect. It led to the same question he'd been struggling with all afternoon, allow the village hidden in the Sound as well as Orochimaru to continue, or burn it to the ground at the first possible opportunity. He knew where many of the bases were, who would eventually guard them. The idea of Otagakure as Orochimaru marketed it, a place for the outcast, the misanthropic, and the forgotten to band together and survive. Under Orochimaru's leadership, they often did not. A culture of fear mixed with mercenary loyalty and force allowed Sound to exist under the radar, taking contracts the established ninja villages either didn't notice or couldn't be associated with. He'd freed the prisoners and burnt it down the first time, only for the village to spring back up alongside Orochimaru. Could the leaf intervene early enough to change its character? Should it? Could Orochimaru be changed? Could anything in this time? Sasuke's cynical side didn't think so. Indra clung to the idea as if it was a life raft. Indra tended to sound a lot like Naruto Uzumaki in his head, really. Indra crumpled up the page of personnel he'd drafted and let it fall to the floor and started a new page. The village hidden in the sound. Save Taka, reunite Uzumaki. Kill Kabuto. Orochimaru? Destroy all evidence of the reanimation technique. The land of rice paddies or the hidden village. Once he'd recovered, sound would be the best starting point. Make nice with the Leaf Village by bringing in or killing one of their most prominent missing nin, building alliances with members of other nations, even if they were missing nin, and most importantly burning every scrap of information on the second Hokage-stemmed reanimation jutsu to smithereens. If the Fourth Great Ninja War had proven anything, it was that Tobirama's techniques were often far more trouble than they were worth. 65,000 dead shinobi from the allied nations and a revived Madara were complications Indra intended to remove as early as possible. Sasuke had been impaled by his ancestor and had no desire to repeat the experience. If he had his way, the scrolls on the jutsu within the leaf would be destroyed as well, but first things first. Indra set the pen aside and closed his eye in frustration. His handwriting was still shaky, but that was why he'd asked for so much paper. Testing his new limits was important and he wanted to be ready for action the moment the medic nin cleared him for duty. The Sharingan helped, but it was a drain on his chakra, and even with a week's rest, he didn't feel comfortable using that much just to write legibly. So practice it was. Begrudgingly, he wondered if he'd need glasses when the door blasted open. Younger, 7 minutes earlier. Once again, Sasuke silently thanked Naruto for his singular, never-to-be-repeated stroke of genius. He'd heard people call him a genius, with everything it implied after him, but Sakura was the real thing. She'd memorized their entire textbook and could repeat it whenever Naruto had difficulty with what the teachers were discussing, which was frequently. He was smart, but these genjutsu principles were simply beyond him. Focus? Sure, he could focus. He'd been focused on a singular goal for the past year and a half. Space construction? Difficult, but possible. He just had to imagine a room or an environment he'd been in enough times to remember the little details. Mitsuki-sensei loved to stress how important the details were to a good genjutsu. But populating that space while maintaining it? Nearly impossible. Ino could do it, but she was a Yamanaka, that was almost expected. She'd likely been getting training from her clan, the best in Konoha at jutsu involving the mind. Sasuke could hold the space in his mind, he could imagine objects within his mind like kunai or shuriken, but holding both in his mind as he moved through the space himself and interacted with it? Infuriating. Sakura had mastered the genjutsu on her second attempt and was speaking animatedly with Shikamaru on the necessary level of detail when entrapping Chunin compared to a genin. Sasuke still had trouble picking up a kunai inside his own genjutsu, and Naruto was hopeless. 2 weeks ago he would have smirked at the blonde, either openly or from behind his hands, and focused on methods solely to improve his own jutsu. Now he approached his friend. "Hey, Naruto," he asked the frowning Uzumaki. "Yeah, what's up? Falling behind already? You just keep closing your eyes and looking vaguely sick." Naruto gave him a brief glare before shrugging and leaning back in his chair. "The basic part, my surroundings. I keep trying to imagine my apartment or your dojo, but I keep thinking about something else." Sasuke nodded and pulled Naruto's notebook over towards him. "Okay, so how are you imagining it?" "I tried just holding all of my house in my head, but that didn't work. Just focus on one thing, like your bed, or the floor, then add one thing at a time until you have a room." He looked around. "Actually, maybe we should just use the classroom. We're right here, even an idiot like you should be able to remember what's right in front of you." Naruto smiled. "That's worth a shot." They both looked over at Sakura, who'd wandered closer and had apparently put Koji under the genjutsu as he tried to break out of it. "Maybe we should ask her." Sasuke shook his head, pride and pragmatism warring inside his skull. "No way, we've got to give it one more shot, together." His classmate nodded and as one, they both closed their eyes, made the sign of the crane, and imagined their rooms. The floor of the living room. He always started there. He wiped away the bodies, the blood, the brother standing in the shadows, the tears in the rice paper. The walls, the half-open sliding door, the moonlight shining in through the window, the shadows on top of the floor. The hallway beyond the door, his room, my room, the entrance. The house expanded in his mind as if he was walking down its corridors. The kitchen, mother and father's room, father's study, the front door. He exhaled. He'd finished the house, now to add items inside. A kunao, a stack of shuriken, cat's pile of bamboo sticks. He thought for a moment. Let's see if I can make Cat-san as well. A humanoid shape formed, the cat mask clearly defined and in sharp relief. Purple hair spilled out behind the mask, and her armor had the same steely gray texture it always had. But something about her stance was off. He opened his eyes. It was her pose. He'd had her standing straight, arms at her sides, in the most formal parade ground position he could think of, how all ninja were supposed to present themselves before the Hokage. But it wasn't how she stood. He closed his eyes to find the house slightly blurry, the details sharpening as he renewed his concentration. The cat in front of him brought one hand up to rest on her hip, while the other splayed its fingers slightly. He broke the illusion in his excitement at the realization. She spreads her fingers to grab her kunao at any moment, and keeps a hand at her hip to draw her sword. He grinned, pleased that he'd deciphered the Umbu's movements and that he'd been able to add them to the illusion. Beside him, Naruto was not having the same luck. He kept opening and closing his eyes as he tried to take in everything around him, head constantly turning to take in details. He met Sasuke's eyes and glared, though the look was tempered by the flush of embarrassment. Sasuke met the look with one of his own, trying to convey the confidence he now felt flowing through him as a result of his latest success. Look, what's the most basic thing, what do you start imagining first? The desks, right? Just floating? Too strange for your mind, start with the floor, then the walls. You've gotta build a space for everything else to exist in, otherwise it's too weird for your mind to visualize. You sound like Mitsuki-sensei. You would too, if you'd listen for once. Their bickering was cut off by the sound of the classroom door slamming open, admitting a harried-looking Chunin in dark goggles. Uchiha Sasuke. The class fell silent instantly, heads turning to look in his direction. Sasuke wanted to shrivel into the ground, but Naruto's presence had him straighten his stance and raise his hand. Here. What's going on? The class swiveled back to the Chunin, even Mitsuki-sensei looking curious. You've been summoned to the hospital, Uchiha-san. Your dash, he paused, feeling the weight of his sentence, uncle is awake and has asked for you to see him. Sasuke's mind raced as he stared blankly at the Chunin. He'd been asked for by name, which meant the intruder knew his identity, which meant his dream had been real, or at least not entirely fake. Time to test the waters. Does this uncle have a name? He'd expected his voice to waver or sound as young as he felt, but it came out calm and smooth, the voice of someone who was in control, which he very much did not feel. The Chunin fiddled with his glasses and pulled out a scroll from one breast pocket. Mitsuki-sensei tried to peek surreptitiously at it, only to be silenced by the giggles from the class and a glare from the nameless Chunin. He called himself Indra Uchiha, if that name means anything. Eyes shot back to Sasuke, who turned and looked at Naruto. You wanna come with? Whoever he is, he knew enough to mention you by name. Whispers redoubled and even Mitsuki-sensei looked interested. A mysterious Uchiha knowing the name of the village's most troublesome brat? Curiouser and curiouser. Naruto nodded. Sure thing. I was gonna back you up even if you didn't ask, you know. Sasuke fought to keep a smile of relief from breaking across his face, but the corners of his mouth did twitch upwards. Good. Let's go. Sorry Mitsuki-sensei. The teacher waved them off. Look, I get it, I'm a Chunin. When you're summoned, you're summoned. No worries. And on that note, he turned to the class, now our genjutsu lesson is well and truly ruined, let's go over what little I'm permitted to tell you about summoning, now that I know none of you will remember a word I say this afternoon. There were collective groans as Sasuke and Naruto grabbed their bags and moved to the front of the class. Settle down, settle down. Rest assured, I'm just as curious to hear what's going to happen as you are, but we can't march the whole class over to the hospital, can we? Why not? Piped up Sakura, eyes blazing as the boys were ushered out of the room without her. It's a matter of public interest, right? We can make it an educational field trip on the effectiveness of medical ninja. Mitsuki opened his mouth to object, then paused as Ino did something with her hands from the other side of the classroom. Well, he said slowly, I suppose it's not the worst idea in the world. The Chunin grabbed Naruto and Sasuke by the scruff of their necks and ran. To his credit, they made it out the front door of the academy before the class surged after them. Sasuke had never run so fast in his life. Chapter 17, Questioning Yourself. Indra knew there were numerous levels of security around his hospital room, from the physical presence of 4 Umbu agents, to the sealing formulae around the doors and windows he pretended to ignore, to the commanding presence of Dr. Ontoba, whose orders Sasuke was reluctantly following. The man had held him down effortlessly the previous evening to administer a sedative after a discussion about the Akatsuki had gotten him riled up, cursing Zetsu at the top of his lungs. So Indra was still fighting off the after effects of the drug when the door burst open and he was bowled over by a Chunin Abarame covered in sweat and 2 small, screaming children. At least, that was the excuse he would abide by until the end of his days. The Chunin managed to say, Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto to see you dash, before Crane and Beetle were overwhelmed by 24 other noisy children, cheering and babbling excitedly at the top of their lungs. Indra scrambled back into his pillows, thrashing about wildly with his single arm. Wow, a real Umbu. So is it true, are you really an Uchiha? Are you a cloud assassin? What's your real name? Are you dangerous? How many limbs have you lost? My dad says most ninja lose one. Did the sage send you? How'd you get here? Indra covered his ears as best he could, shoving his head into the curl of his bicep as his eyes roved hungrily over the faces crowding around the bed, even as the Umbu and a bewildered-looking teacher with silver hair bodily carried out 2 students at a time. The questions were irrelevant, what was important were the faces. To see his colleagues, his friends as children, with open faces and excited grins. He'd seen Ino grim-faced as she pulled the memories from a gibbering refugee's mind and order troop movements as her subject collapsed to the floor. He'd seen Shino unleash custom-bred beetles that devoured a battleship off the coast of Kubrika Island, and Kiba rip an ear off a rebellious stone Jonin to make a point. To see them now, curious, young, and carefree, wasn't just strange, it made him question the last 30 years of his life. Memories of peace, struggle, and grim apocalypse alike when faced with memories he'd idealized so much he'd been sure half of it was Naruto's own rose-tinted nostalgia bleeding into his own recollections. But no. They were just as happy, curious, and cheery as he remembered. Half of him wanted to smile, the other half wanted to puke. Despite his best efforts, he could feel the gorge rising in his throat and wildly motioned at those unfortunates clustered around the right side of the bed. Eagle, sage bless him, realized what Indra meant first and scooped an endangered child out of the line of fire. The bowl he was aiming for received most of the vomit, but the intelligence report on the Deodara of Hidden Stone was ruined, which was just as well. As Indra gagged and slumped over the side of the bed, the children scattered. Nothing like an accidental fluid expulsion to scare off civilians. At least, that's what the Umbu were thinking. Indra just hated himself a little bit more. A chorus of "Eoww" flew across the room and the hospitalized Uchiha was suddenly much less crowded. He spat and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looking up at the Abarame Chunin and Inoichi Yamanaki, whose presence was like a yellow thundercloud of disappointment and anger. The latter addressed the hapless Chunin. Mizuki, get these children out of here. The quicker you do that the more likely you can keep your job. Eagle, make sure none of them picked up any of those medical records. The Chunin bowed and began herding the numerous, babbling children out of the room while Eagle stood by the door, glancing at each one of them with an Umbu's practiced eye. No one would accidentally or otherwise leave with even a shred of the stacks of intelligence Indra had compiled for the Leaf Village. The man himself was busy scrubbing his face with a damp cloth someone had handed him and looked up to thank the considerate Umbu agent when he froze. It hadn't been an Umbu agent who had handed him the washcloth, it was himself. Indra Uchiha looked into the eyes of his younger self, already serious, cynical, and just a little bit frightened for what seemed like an eternity. Hey! A hand waved back and forth between them, breaking the spell of the moment. Indra looked over to see, who else? Naruto Uzumaki, waving at them with a look of confusion. Are you guys gonna just stare all day or are we gonna talk? You said you wanted to, you know. No, wait, the younger Sasuke interrupted, pointing at the Chunin, who was hustling the last of the uninvited guests out the door. She stays. Sakura, who was perfectly happy leaving a hospital room with a scruffy, puking, weird-looking man in it, turned and looked back at him skeptically. Why? I thought this was a dash. She stopped. She was going to call it a family conversation, but the man had insisted Naruto be there as well, and he could barely pass a basic theory test in class. It's not like the class dunce was going to contribute much and she'd helped Sasuke find out about his parents. Maybe she did deserve to be here. Mizuki tugged on her arm again. Let's go, Sakura, Sasuke needs some privacy with his uncle. No, a quiet, but firm voice from Sasuke again. She's smart, she stays. The Chunin instructor looked at Inoichi, who looked down to Indra, who raised an eyebrow at Sasuke. You get the last word. Do you want her here? Yes. Why? On the surface, there was no real reason for Sasuke to make this request. He'd interacted with her only with the goal of getting his numerous admirers off his back and quieting the gossip at lunch as much as possible. But Naruto liked her, and she'd been getting the best marks in their class, above even his. She'd helped them find out more about his mother, even if some of it was stuff he wanted to forget. But above all, she'd kept his secrets. She could have used what she'd learned to turn him into an object of scorn, or blackmail him, or even simply share some juicy gossip with her friend Ino. But Sakura wasn't like that. She was a bit of a romantic, occasionally blunt, painfully naive, but she was smart enough to realize how much his trust meant. She and Naruto might not be full ninja skilled in deception, but he knew this was going to be a heavy conversation with a new surviving member of the Uchiha clan, and Sasuke needed people he knew, without a shadow of doubt, were on his side. She's with me. He held his breath, but it worked. Mizuki-sensei shrugged, patted the girl on the back, and left the room. Sasuke gulped while the man on the bed draped the washcloth over his shoulder, the one covered in stitches. Inoichi-san, please take Crane outside with you and perform a security barrier if you can. It's best this conversation remain between us. Ino's father seemed about to object, but something in the patient's manner satisfied him. We'll put up a muffling barrier, no one can hear normal conversation, but shout if we're needed. Adequate enough. Inoichi gave Sakura a slight smile and left, closing the door behind him. In the sudden silence, the click of the door was like an explosive tag. Sasuke stood closest to the bed, with Naruto next to him, the blonde's hand now subtly bumping his own in silent support. Sakura moved over to stand next to them and she noticed the man on the bed turned to keep them all in the sight of his one visible eye. He opened his mouth several times, as if to say something, then closed it again. I thought I'd know what to say by now. He admitted, leaning back into the pillows on the bed and bringing his, also bandaged, hand up to cover his face. Me too, said Naruto, and Sasuke saw the man's lips quirk in that signature Uchiha style that meant he was trying to suppress a smile and failing. The smile spread across the man's face like a transformation jutsu, washing away the exhaustion and pain that riddled his features. Though nothing visibly changed, he suddenly looked 20 years younger. Always you, Uzumaki, he said, more to himself, but Naruto perked up at the mention of his name. You never change. Sasuke spoke next. In that dream we had, you asked me to come find you, and to bring Naruto Uzumaki if the Hokage wouldn't let me. Why was that? The man on the bed chuckled. Because when there's an Uchiha in trouble, there should be an Uzumaki to drag him out of it. That wasn't how your plan worked out. Quite the opposite, really. Sasuke's voice was firm, betraying no weakness. He ended up insulting the Hokage and his council in front of the village and almost got us killed. At that, the patient levered himself up, hand grasping for a weapon that wasn't there. What? How? His distress was evident, and his hand clutched the sheets at his waist before he cursed and fell back, exhausted from even that brief burst of activity. Why should I tell you anything, when you haven't even given us your name? You already seem to know us. Are you a spy? Is that what this is? The man on the bed shrugged. You make an excellent point, Uchiha-san. I'm not as sharp as I should be. Getting shot in the head will do that. He shook his head and took a deep breath. None of that matters now, you deserve to know. My name is Indra Uchiha, illegitimate son of Fugaku Uchiha and Shinin Mikari Tandashi of the Hidden Cloud, hidden protector of the Uchiha bloodline and clan from now until the day of my death. You, Sasuke Uchiha, are the last Uchiha loyal to the village hidden in the leaves and the head of the clan. The man's recitation, oddly formal and clearly rehearsed, broke down as his breath hitched. The children could see he was struggling not to cry. When Indra spoke next, his voice was shaky, but he wasn't looking directly at Sasuke, he was looking through him. I failed you. You needed me here and I failed you, failed your mother and everyone else because I thought keeping you safe was more important than being next to you. I didn't know how to love you and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Sarada. The room fell silent as Indra scrubbed at his eye and pulled himself together. Sasuke shot Sakura a look and she couldn't decipher if it meant help me or this man is crazy. Naruto clumsily offered the man a box of tissues, which he accepted with a watery smile. Nice to see that face again. Naruto's eyes widened. You said that before, about Uzumaki and Uchiha, right? What's that about? Indra nestled the tissue box into the side of his supporting pillows and locked eyes not with his questioner, but with Sasuke. I really should start from the beginning. Like I said, my name is Indra Uchiha. I was born 27 years ago just before the Third Great Ninja War to a minor noblewoman in the Land of Lightning. Your father and mine, Fugaku Uchiha, was on an infiltration mission to capture enemy intelligence that was about to be delivered to the Raikage and was determined to acquire it by any means necessary. He shifted uncomfortably and the children all found themselves drawing closer to the bed and its occupant, enthralled by the story. He acquired the intelligence and left, ignorant of the fact that Lady Tandashi had forgotten to drink her moon tea that month after he had hidden with her to avoid capture. And so, 9 months later I was born, an Uchiha in a land that had just started killing them on the northern borders of Konoha. She kept me, taught me reading and writing, but as I grew older and my gifts as a ninja became too obvious, she smuggled me away, across the border and lost her life in the process. Indra looked up and saw anger etched across Sasuke's features. You're lying, my father only had 2 sons, he could never be unfaithful to my mother. Why is everyone so intent on making my parents into horrible people? This story of yours is pure fantasy. He stormed towards the door, but Sakura grabbed his arm. Please, Sasuke, just let him finish his story. This was years and years ago, he might not have even married your mother yet. And Uchiha-san said, he never knew. Yeah, Naruto interjected. Plenty of kids in the orphanage never knew who their parents were, it happens. His gaze softened as he looked at Indra. It's rough, I get it. At that, Sasuke stilled and turned back to Indra, who had watched the conversation with interest. So if you're an Uchiha, you must have a Sharingan. Show me those eyes and then I'll listen. Naruto perked up. Hey Sasuke. He tapped the Uchiha's shoulder and they moved away to have a brief whispered discussion. Sasuke seemed skeptical, but Naruto was excited, rotating his hands in a way obviously meant to imitate the Sharingan. Sakura, at a loss, looked to Indra and dived into the refuge of every lost conversation, the weather. So, what was the weather like, in the Land of Lightning? Indra's mouth twitched in what Sakura could already tell was the Uchiha version of a smile. It's in the name really. Frequent storms, lots of cloud cover. But if the winds blew fair, you could see for miles in every direction, down into the valleys where the farmers worked. Kyumigakuer had to reinforce their buildings every year to accommodate for the snowfall or heavy winds, at least until dash. He stopped, catching himself and Sakura pounced on the statement. Until what? At that, Naruto and Sasuke turned back to look at Indra, who waved a hand in dismissal. It's not relevant right now. Like I said, I should tell this story in order. Whatever argument was happening between them, Sasuke ended it decisively and strode back, plopping down into Inoichi's chair and crossing his arms and legs to convey his displeasure. And like I said, you'll do that only after you've shown me your Sharingan. He paused. Your full Sharingan. Indra suddenly glared at him and for a moment, they could feel his anger rouse itself from beneath the exhaustion and pain. How do you know of dash? He frowned in thought and for a moment, To Sakura both Uchiha looked exactly identical, almost like twins, if Sasuke had been 2 decades older and missing an eye. Of course I'd forgotten. Itachi told you, didn't he? That foolish bastard. The venom in his voice was mixed with something else, but before Sakura could decipher it, Naruto interrupted. Well, Jiji told us about it too. He told us lots of stuff when Sasuke and I went to meet him, you know. Indra gave first Naruto, and then Sakura a questioning look, his single eyebrow raising higher and higher until it disappeared into his hair, which made Naruto giggle. Indra-san, you look kinda funny right now. For his part, Indra looked to Sasuke, and turned his palm upwards, his face asking in Uchiha's, do they know about this conversation? Sasuke blew air out through his nose and pouted even harder. They know what I know, old man, now show me. His last 2 words had the air of a command, but Indra wasn't offended. He blinked and his dark eye spiraled out into the softly glowing red of the Sharingan, 3 tomo spinning slowly in his iris. Oh, wow, breathed Sakura. The tomo spun even faster, then sharpened and folded in upon themselves, before exploding into a galaxy of black and red still contained within his single eye. Indra's voice was grim. The Mangekyo Sharingan. A rare power, even among the Uchiha, said to only be obtainable by killing one's closest friend. Sakura let out a gasp and began to back away towards the door, but both Indra and Sasuke shot her a glance that said stay where you are. With a growing sense of fright, she obeyed, even as Indra breathed out and the red glow in his eye dimmed, then vanished into its normal black. However, that is not the only way to obtain the Mangekyo Sharingan. Deep trauma or anguish of any kind can bring it about. Clan records say that only Madara Uchiha, our legendary founder, was the only one to achieve this power, before your brother Itachi. In my experience, I believe those records are false. Indra smirked at the look on Sasuke and Naruto's faces. Caught you by surprise on that one, I believe many members of my clan, fearful of the Mangekyo's reputation and the infighting it brought, kept it hidden their entire lives or used it sparingly. It is a dangerous power for to use it courts blindness, madness, and death, often at too high a cost. But it can be used. Interrupted Naruto. To do all sorts of stuff, like seal the 9 tails you know. Sakura looked between them, expressions swapped. Now Naruto was the one whose face betrayed a grim resolve while Indra looked shocked. The 3rd Hokage really did tell you everything, didn't he? Well, I did throw a kunao at Counselor Danzo. I think that put him in a good mood, admitted Naruto. At that, Indra laughed, a soft chuckle that quickly exploded into guffaws that edged into hysteria before subsiding and prompting more use from Naruto's tissue box. Thank you, Naruto, I needed that, said Indra. Now, where were we? You had been smuggled into the land of fire at a young age by your mother, who died in the attempt, recited Sakura, as she crossed the room to sit next to Sasuke. She reflexively looked for paper or a pencil to take notes with, but there was none to be found. Inoichi and the Umbu had been very thorough. Indra resumed his story. Thank you. As I was saying, I ended up in the land of fire, which was much more dangerous than it was now. The Konoha ninja who normally kept the peace were off fighting in the war, and bandits or other unscrupulous characters were a regular irritant to travelers, particularly caravans, or refugees. I joined one such caravan, which is where I met my best friend. At this, Indra smiled fondly, the same kind of smile that appeared on his face when he'd first seen Naruto, and it made Sakura smile a little as well. Sasuke, of course, remained immune. I met Ashura Uzumaki, who cheered up another lost, confused boy and was convinced he could become Hokage one day, if you can believe such a thing. Believe it. That makes total sense, Indra-san. I'm an Uzumaki and I also want to be Hokage someday, you know. Naruto leaned forward over Sasuke's chair, almost toppling the boy over, he was so excited. What did he look like? What kind of ninjutsu could he do? What kind of ramen did he like to eat? Was he tall? I hope I grow up to be tall, you know. Indra's smile shrank, but Sakura realized his expression was one of fondness. No, more than that, this was someone Indra Uchiha had loved deeply. He was actually pretty short, sorry Naruto. He had short red hair and blue eyes, used the shadow clone jutsu, and he loved miso and pork ramen more than anything in the world. No way. That's my favorite kind of ramen too, you know? Do you know where he is? We could invite him to the village and he could eat at Ichiraku's with me. They've got the best ramen ever. Indra's smile was fading fast. I'm sorry Naruto, he said softly, but he's gone. It was Sakura who rallied her group as Naruto's face shattered in front of her. But gone doesn't mean dead, though. Right Indra-san? Indra was visibly weighing his options when Sasuke spoke up as well. Tell us the truth, we're not children. Indra snorted in amusement and his smile had curdled into bitterness. Yes, you very much are. But Sakura Haruno is correct. He's missing, not confirmed dead. At least I hope so. He reached out a hand towards Naruto but let it fall when the children made no move closer to him. The Uzumaki I knew were some of the toughest people on the planet. Lived the longest, survived the worst the ninja world could throw at them. Lost their village and still survived, some would. Most ninja clans in that situation would be dust on the wind by now. He's alive. He repeated it like a mantra. He's alive. I know for sure the location of at least one other Uzumaki who would love to be here in the village, and rumors of a few more. If I'm stuck in this bed for the foreseeable future, would you help me write them a few letters? By the time I'm well enough to travel, you'll all be well on your way to becoming ninja and we can go meet them. He sounded both hopeful and pleased at his own idea. Naruto, Sakura could tell, was conflicted. She knew he didn't have parents and Sasuke had mentioned he'd been living alone before he'd been roped into the Uchiha's shenanigans. Family. A clan. Even a non-clan member like her understood the power of that offer. It sounded too good to be true. She leaned over and pressed her foot down on Naruto's. When he turned to look, she shook her head, just the slightest bit. Naruto scrunched up his face. I'll think about it, Indra-san. That's a good idea though. Enough. Sasuke's voice was still cold and Sakura saw he was now glaring daggers at Indra. You think you can manipulate us so easily, like he did? Because we're just little kids, we'd believe your story about Uzumaki, Uchiha, and this fairy tale about a noblewoman from the Cloud Village? That my father had a secret son he never told us about? Come up with something original. Indra glared right back at Sasuke. She saw the similarity again, like an echo. Creepy. What answer would satisfy you? That I'm a disgraced Uchiha trying to reclaim a family name when there's no one left to object? That I'm a liar and a spy with an implanted Sharingan? That I'm from a future where the ninja world was eradicated and I'm here to set things right? He reined himself invisibly, releasing his clenched hand from the sheets. Look, I get it. You're afraid to hope I'm real. That you won't be the last one, that the burden and duty of killing Itachi won't be yours alone. That you won't have to wake up in an empty house screaming every night. Because now that there's something else in your life, its existence is like a splinter under your skin. That you don't know who Sasuke Uchiha is anymore if he can't be an Avenger? I get it. I was there. I suffered the same way, for a long time. I ran with some pretty bad people, did some pretty bad things. But I'm here now. It's not just you, and it's not just me. Sakura glanced at the boys, who were both spellbound. Naruto clutched one hand at his chest while Sasuke had frozen in the chair, his hands curled around the armrests like he was bound there. Her own breathing sounded like the loudest thing in the room as Indra sighed and let his anger go. There is so much about me and you and us, he spread his arms to indicate the three children, that is so fucked up and I have no idea how to fix it. I still need to fix myself. But I know that we are not beyond fixing. Sasuke's chair skidded backwards as he stood, hands crushing something invisible. What makes you think that? You don't know me. You don't know anything. The only reason you're still alive is because you weren't here when my brother killed everyone. That means what you think is nothing. You're worthless until you give me a reason and a solid story to trust you instead of coming after my life to shore up your own. Why should I trust you? His face had twisted into something frightening. Sakura had seen a stray dog caught in a broken fence, once, wounded and in pain. Sasuke's face reminded her of the wounded animal. Indra blinked. His Naruto's words echoed over and over until he'd finally understood. What kind of a person can become Hokage, when they can't even save their friend? The memory was gone. Sasuke crossed his arms and even Sakura gave him a skeptical glance. What the hell does that mean? Why would you want to become Hokage when you've never been in the village? Because my friend, my Husky was my family. For a long time, even when I didn't want him to be, when I drove everyone else away. He was my family, just like you. And family doesn't give up on family. We aren't family. You don't even know me. Sasuke stormed towards the door as Naruto and Sakura followed, though at least they cast pitying or questioning glances back at Indra. Before they could leave, Indra knew what he had to say. That's true, I don't know you, Sasuke. But I'd like to. Sasuke had flung open the door, but he paused in the doorway. Eagle leaned in through the top of the doorframe as blue, orange, and red filled the bottom. Sasuke turned and his face was somehow impassive once more as he took in Indra's ravaged form. The injured shinobi held his gaze, unblinking. Sasuke turned again and was gone. Unsurprisingly, Naruto broke the silence. So, thanks for meeting us, mister. I mean Indra-san. Sakura managed to clobber him and bow at the same time. It was honestly impressive. You have no tact, do you, knucklehead? I'm sorry, Uchiha-san, but again, thank you for speaking with us. We truly appreciate your time. Indra nodded. The pleasure was mine, Harano-san, Uzumaki-san. The moment the sentence had finished, the two students bowed again and broke into a run down the corridor, shouting for Sasuke to wait. Eagle slid back into his corner and closed the door as Indra fell back into his pillows. So, how much of that could the whole floor hear? The Umbu let out a dry chuckle devoid of any real humor. Something about traitor to the Leaf and clan name. Another miserable liar just like him. This, Indra said, addressing the ceiling more than the Umbu, was an absolute disaster. Chapter 18, The Chicken of Sorriness. They found Sasuke mashing the elevator button with the single-minded intensity of a veteran pachinko gambler. Naruto opened his mouth, looked to Sakura, then closed it again. He raised his arms in a silent "what do we do?" gesture, where she responded by miming a zipper over her mouth. Stop talking about me behind my back, came the sharp voice. Hey, said Naruto indignant, did you hear a word out of us? I can see your reflections in the metal, morons. Naruto waved a hand experimentally and a dark shape on the chrome doors moved too. So, what next? Do whatever you want, I'm going to go home and get some rest. Like I said, you can stay in the Uchiha compound, just not tonight. Sure, I get it. That was, a whole lot dash. Not yet, you two. They both turned to look at Sakura. Naruto in puzzlement, Sasuke with both exhaustion and a flickering resentment. What? Sakura planted her feet and glared back at them both. We're going out to dinner first, no backing out. Why do you care? Because I'm your friend. Because I just sat there and listened to two Uchiha yell for what felt like 12 hours and I am getting some fried chicken. Do either of you realize we talked through lunch? The ding of the elevator and the growl of Naruto's stomach made for a curious combination. Come on. No dash. What dash? Hey. There was a brief scrum as several nurses tried to step out while Sakura shoved the boys into the elevator, but they managed it. Something about her felt different, felt like Ino, or maybe Naruto as well. She wasn't worrying about how she sounded, or looked, or what Sasuke thought about her. Sasuke clearly had lots of feelings right now. But Sakura? She felt good. She felt powerful. Her glare was what would come to be known to Konoha construction workers as the Wrecking Ball Special, and Sasuke was too tired to argue as she gripped his arm. We're going. Sasuke closed his eyes in resignation. Fine. To their credit, they were silent for the rest of the way while Sakura led them deep into the maze of Konoha's residential districts. Only after Sakura had planted them on stools and ordered the waitress to bring 2 boxes of the Harano usual did the conversation begin. Naruto fiddled with his chopsticks before turning to Sakura and asking, so, what made you go for fried chicken? I thought girls were all into eating healthy stuff like salads. Sakura rolled her eyes. Look, Naruto, just because you can survive only on ramen noodles doesn't mean the rest of us are total strangers to junk food. Now she was the one spinning her chopsticks while Sasuke stared a hole in the opposite wall. Look, remember that big fight I had with Ino earlier this year? Yeah, you called her a pig witch and she said you were a dash. My dad brought me here back then. He said his sensei brought him here after rough missions during his genin days and he wanted to pass it along. Plus, she admitted, I really need something deep-fried and two-handed to eat right now. Wanted to rub your parents in our faces. Sasuke's accusation made Naruto and Sakura both jump as if stung. What the hell, Sasuke? Seriously? I'm trying to do something nice. The Uchiha clasped his hands in front of his face, but they didn't miss the sneer. I brought you in there because I thought you'd been a good judge of character. I thought you could help me wring the truth out of him. Sakura's shock was quickly melting as the exhaustion and anger within her rose to meet Sasuke's own. Inner Sakura was well and truly in the driver's seat now. What, you think I'm some kind of interrogation genius? I've been in the same class as you every day and Iruka-sensei hasn't mentioned how to talk to missing clan members yet. Ino taught me about flowers, not a mind transfer jutsu. I thought that's why Naruto said you'd be worth something to us, because you could get all those girls to lay off us dash. Hey, that's not what I dash. Worth something. Sakura's shriek reached fearful heights as her hand snapped her chopsticks in half. Sasuke was holding his like a kunao. Naruto laughed nervously. Okay guys, I think we should really tone it down here before we get kicked out of here. They both ignored him. Explain why you'd think I'd need to prove myself to you when last week you wouldn't even look my way. Sasuke's tone was withering. Maybe it was the admiring gazes. Or the blushing, or the fact you're growing your hair long because some dumb girl thought I liked long hair. Maybe it was how you and everyone else kept talking about, he put on a breathy falsetto, which just made his voice even higher. Sasuke-kun, Sasuke-kun, Sasuke-kun. I'm sick of it, and now dash. Oh look, shouted a desperate Naruto, food. The waitress placed 2 boxes of chicken between them and fled for cover. The rest of the small stand tried to pretend like they weren't listening to every word. For now, they were to be disappointed. The 2 combatants ate in silence and Sasuke was forced to admit that Sakura was right about one thing. The chicken was delicious. At first, when the girl had ordered 2 buckets of chicken for 3 children, the waitress questioned her sanity, citing sodium poisoning. This did not account for an Uzumaki appetite and Naruto made something of a show of it for his friends. He stuffed whole drumsticks into his mouth and played drums with the bones. He spread crumbs everywhere until Sasuke snapped at him to eat like a normal human being. Upon seeing Naruto mask his hurt expression with another grin, Sakura took to pointedly snapping the bones of their chicken thighs and piling them on her own plate in a miniature pyramid. The dam of silence broke when the check arrived. Sasuke automatically reached for it, only for Sakura to snatch it out of his hand. Sorry Miss Evie, can you just put it on my dad's tab? I'll explain to him tonight, I'm sure it's okay. The waitress looked doubtful. If you say so, Sakura-chan. Sasuke's hand closed on the other side of the little black booklet. It's fine, I can cover it. My dad dash. It's not about the money. I got you involved in this and it was a mistake. A thin green frog wallet landed on top of the check. No, it wasn't. They both finally looked at Naruto. Geez, I thought I was the dummy here. Sasuke, Sakura-chan helped us out when we needed it and you invited her to stay in that hospital room when she wanted to leave. Now you want to kick her out? Look, that guy said a lot of stuff and I don't know if I believe it either. Neither do you two. Indra-san had a lot to say and he wasn't real cheery today. Now we're all tired and angry, so let's just all make up and split the check, you know? Like grown UPS do. We can figure things out later. Someone in the restaurant coughed and Sakura was suddenly very aware of how many eyes were on her. Oh, her mother was going to have a fit. Okay. Sorry I dragged you out here, I just wanted to take your mind off this guy. Sorry I spilled crumbs all over everybody. Sasuke wasn't looking directly at either of them. Sorry for what I said before. About. Sakura's voice was inflexible, copying how her mother made her apologize. Sorry for saying you weren't worth something and that thing about your parents. That was uncalled for. Sakura nodded and let go of the check. Thanks. Sasuke and Naruto did the same. To his credit, Naruto was already beaming again, but she couldn't tell if it was a false smile or not. Like I said, we'll head out. See you at school tomorrow, you know. Sakura allowed herself a small smile of her own. I'll be there, see you later. As they left in separate directions, the Umbu on the roof also split up. The last comment made by Beetle summed it up. If they keep this up, we'll have to build a whole new psych ward just for those three in Umbu. Freakin' bonkers. Hound silently agreed. Older. He is expecting it, but Sasuke allows himself a groan as masked Umbu in black cloaks silently let themselves in. They don't even make a token effort at concealing their presence, reminding Sasuke by their movements alone that root in every meaningful way is Konoha, that they have every right to be here, to own every organ of his body if their leader deems it necessary. All to ensure the survival and prosperity of Konoha. Danzo's eternal justification for his actions, one he believed wholeheartedly, as if it made the butcher's bill any lower. He didn't have enough time to attempt the Yamanaka sublimation jutsu, so Sasuke didn't bother. He would face Danzo as Sasuke Uchiha once more and trust to his own will and his singular Sharingan to face Danzo's own. He raised his head from the pillow. Can we do this tomorrow night? I've had enough deep personal conversations today, schedule's full. We cannot, said Danzo as he came through the door opened silently by one of the 1, 2, 3, 12 shinobi present in the room. Spider is absent, which means this is less likely to be an open attempt on his life, but Sasuke knows he has made Root very curious about him, a wayward Uchiha with far too much knowledge. I hope someone thought to bring a pen, because I'm not taking notes tonight. That's what Inoichi's reports are for. You've still left a great many questions to be answered, Indra Uchiha. If that is your name. Danzo gestures and the Umbu by the door brought in a chair and placed it next to the head of Sasuke's bed. Close enough for a quiet conversation and lit only by the light of the moon streaming in from the window. That, at least, is a light Root cannot smother, which Sasuke finds comforting. Now, how did you come to discover the foundation? Sasuke pushed himself into a sitting position and ignored how the Umbu twitch at his movements, even as slow and pained as they are. My duties as a guardian of our bloodline made it difficult to miss you, Shimura-san. Going through records of the Third Shinobi War to find battlefield burials, some of them contained unmarked, unaffiliated shinobi. Some of those shinobi carried traces of Konoha bloodlines. He raised a palm to forestall Danzo's reflexive objection, born more from an affront to his tradecraft than any real outrage. Traces few foreign huntermen could see, but for an Uchiha? With decades spent wandering the world. As clear as day. That, at least, wasn't a lie. His Naruto had ordered a fact-finding mission to uncover the extent of Danzo's influence and if there were any contingency plans that could trouble him as Hokage. Like, say, explosive tags rigged underneath the Hokage Tower, or secret underground vaults filled with forbidden jutsu scrolls. As the new head of Umbu and Shadow Hokage, Sasuke had exposed more than a few false flag operations and dug up plenty of battlefield graves. It had inspired Sand and Mist to undertake their own house-cleaning operations, and while the results were bitter, they at least cleared the air for the new leaders of the 5 great nations to deal with one another honestly. Honesty that was utterly foreign to Root, or their more formal moniker of the Foundation. Sasuke continued. Discovering your motives, well, that was another difficult mission, but I considered it the responsibility of a clan guardian. There were already Uchiha in your organization and, well, we deserve better than an unmarked grave and bloody eye sockets. He glared at Danzo as the old man sighed and slowly unwound the bandages on his head. I had hoped you didn't know, but I suppose it was your first priority, wasn't it? Locating the missing Uchiha prodigy. Yes, the highest priority. Again, not a lie. Just not the Uchiha prodigy Danzo was thinking of. I warn you now, Danzo, if you try to use that eye against me, I will pluck it out now and damn the consequences. I am willing to work with you, as much as I loathe everything you choose to be. Do not force my hand. Classic Uchiha arrogance, to think you could take me as you are now. These shinobi would take your hand and head before you even spat your first spark. Suzuki's single red eye locked with Danzo's and he fairly spat the next word. Perhaps. The air in the room, already still despite the presence of so many shinobi, was now suffocating in its weight. Danzo did not react but held the stare. At the least, he was smart enough to not even attempt a genjutsu. Instead, he moved on. You say the eye you lost, to this dash, he pretended to recollect, Obito Uchiha, was the one that could see the future? If that was true, why have you only returned now? Why not stop Itaka before he slaughtered his clan? Why not prevent every Uchiha's death? Or perhaps such a bold lie is simply to mask the fact you have spent so long swimming in secrets, you have now forgotten what the truth tastes like. Suzuki felt his eye begin to water, but refused to blink. To blink would be to admit weakness, even for a moment, and in that moment, Danzo could very well take his remaining eye. The eye that has seen our future is now gone, yes. It allowed me to see many truths and many lies over the years but could never see through them all. Even the sharpest eyesight may miss a kunao if the head it is in has turned away. HN. Quoting the second Hokage, then. Are you aware he was my master? Suzuki was not. I thought not. Still, it proves your own point of fallibility. Tell me, when you supposedly peered with that eye into the future, what did you see? Much of what you have related is too fantastic to be true but dash. It is. Every word of Inoichi's reports is true. What proof can I give you, Shimura-san, that would convince the most cynical man in Konoha? What information could I give that your most skilled spy could not? Danzo was silent, but he finally lowered his eyes in thought. Suzuki gratefully took the chance to blink repeatedly and wiped at his face. It felt as if he was dancing along a tripwire with no chakra and with Rock Lee's infamous leg weights. This was an exceedingly dangerous conversation and he could feel the void pulling at him with every sentence he uttered. Tell me of Orochimaru. What is it he truly desires? He professes a desire to learn all jutsu in existence, and seeks immortality to that end, but it is too trivial for a mind like his. He always sought higher goals, higher than what even I have hoped for, and I would know his purpose. Your favored pupil, you mean? Tell me, of the shinobi in this room, how many worked with Orochimaru? Body collection or disposal? Kekai Genkai theft? Assassination missions? I'm curious. A barb to tease his opponent. Dangerous, but calculated. To Suzuki's satisfaction, the 12 shinobi shuffled slightly, betraying their unease in 1,000 subtle ways. All the emotional repression in the world could not hide micro-tremors in one's arms, or the shift of weight on feet. His Sharingan caught it all. I see. You see nothing. Came Danzo's sharp rejoinder. You didn't, or perhaps, are unable to answer this question. Moth, erase his dash. Orochimaru seeks the Rinnegan. One of the shinobi shifted to look out the window, his posture wary. He seeks that which will allow him to master all jutsu as quickly as possible, and to do so, he requires a mature Sharingan, as well as the flesh dash. Suzuki smirked at Danzo. Well, it wouldn't be safe to tell you either. I've seen you try before, Shimura-san. You thought you could use your Sharingan to control the Ninetales, but your arrogance outstripped the capabilities of your body and you died for it. Again, not a lie. Danzo's failure to control the power of Hashirama Senju had exhausted his chakra and allowed Suzuki to neatly kill him, on that long-ago day on Samurai Bridge. Suzuki locked eyes with Danzo once more, leaning forward to emphasize his point. Shimura Danzo, I shall warn you this once. Attempt to use a single other Sharingan, now, or in the future, for your purposes, whether it is for Konoha or your own strength, and I will see you executed in front of the 5 cage myself. You are not giving me any compelling reason to allow you to live, Uchiha-san. You remain a poor negotiator. It was difficult to convey a wink with only one eye, but Suzuki managed it. But Shimura-san, you forget. I have so much knowledge of the future hidden inside this head of mine, even your best Yamanaka would not be able to pull it out before my suicide jutsu takes effect. If you keep me alive, think of the ways Konoha could be strengthened, the wars avoided, the plans of Cloud or Stone revealed before their strategists so much as put ink to parchment. He let out a bitter laugh. As much as we both might wish it, I am worth more to you alive than dead, because of what I know. Even someone like you dash. Wow, you two know a whole bunch of stuff, don't you? The Umbu spun in circles as they backed up, retreating to the corner of the bed to cover their master. Sasuke's hand twitched with the need to hold a weapon. He knew that voice. Above them, the green jaws of Zetsu emerged, followed by a white and green head. I'm up here, you idiots. The waving Zetsu was immediately impaled by several dozen kunao and shuriken of varying sizes. Oh, and I just wanted to see Senpai have some fun. Sasuke's eye widened and he scrambled closer to the wall. Oshi dash. Black Zetsu emerged from the cracks in the tiled floor as an abyssal maw of teeth and cutting edges. The three Umbu closest to Sasuke's bed, also nearest to Danzo, fell without a sound, bitten cleanly in half. They didn't even bleed as they hit the tile, for the very jaws that killed them had already drained their vital essence to continue the slaughter. As he rose into a humanoid shape, Black Zetsu laughed, even as 5 Umbu fell away, clutching at rents in their cloaks. Really, Indra Uchiha? He mocked. The arrogance of your bloodline is what has made all this so stupidly easy, time after time. Did you really think you could use that name and expect us not to notice? Sasuke shoved one of the dying root agents off of him and opened his hand. His Sharingan spun, then exploded into a kaleidoscope of red and black. Only one thing could stop Zetsu, even temporarily. Amaterasu, flame control. He could hear the Umbu fighting towards the door, with Danzo still at the center, brandishing a vacuum blade of his own. Sir, get out while you can. He's slaughtering us, you fool, just fight. Sir, you mughhh. The masked man fell with a spear of darkness through his head as Black Zetsu chuckled. Really, such pathetic shinobi you create, Shimura Danzo. The old man lashed out with his glowing blade at Zetsu's shoulder, the absence of air sharper than physical materials could ever be, but the darkness simply parted around it, yellow eye staring. Let's see how much punishment you can take, old man. Black flames carved through the sticky tar of Zetsu's torso, creating white lines of contrast as the chakra construct's essence was devoured by the eternal flames, even as they restored themselves. Sasuke gripped the sword of black fire tightly in his hand and allowed himself a smirk as Black Zetsu growled in anger. Let's see about you, abomination. His eye burned in his head as a wall of black fire enveloped the creature, blocking it off from a diagonal slice of the hospital room. It was excruciating, but somehow, he had channeled the power of what had once been both Mangekyo Sharingan through only one. Danzo turned to regard Sasuke, and for the first time, there was a glint of respect in that single narrowed eye. Will that hold it? Not for long, unless you have some kind of sealing jutsu. Sasuke saw a tendril of black worming its way up from the tiles and stabbed down. His makeshift sword sliced clean through the hospital bed and impaled the fragment on the tile. He gritted his teeth. Running out of chakra, Shimura. Danzo nodded and brought his hands together. If he wasn't so focused on keeping the Amaterasu burning, Sasuke would have noted the 16 signs the root leader formed, but the shallow pool of chakra he'd accumulated over the day had run out. The wall of black flame and his sword dissolved as reality reasserted itself and the form of Black Zetsu flowed forward. Oh, yes, Master is going to be very pleased with you indeed. Danzo stepped forward to meet it and brought his hands up to grasp at the chakra construct's face. 8-sign seal, Supreme Order, Takamimyuzu I no Kami. Black lines flowed from his hand and flowed over Black Zetsu, where they sank into its substance. The void frowned. Tricky shinobi. But it's not enough. A black arm rose into the air, its axe-shaped end poised to crash down on Danzo's shoulder, splitting the man in half. A Sharingan spun as Danzo gritted his teeth and ignored the arm. Forbidden Jutsu, Koda Amatsukami. The arm halted, twitching, next to Danzo's ear. He slowly raised his hands from the creature as Sasuke crawled towards the pair on his elbow and stump, chest wheezing with the effort. What did you do? Danzo began to back up and tripped over the body of one of the Umbu. He cursed and fell sideways onto Sasuke's nightstand, sending the empty water jug to shatter against the floor. For a few moments, their ragged breathing and the sound of scattering glass were the only sounds in the room. Commanded him to stop. Not the idea I would have chosen, given time, but the most effective given the circumstances. Oh geez, what did you do to Senpai? You Konoha ninja really don't know how to play nice. White Zetsu complained as his body, still riddled with weapons, fell to the floor with a squelching noise. Fuck off. Not Sasuke's best comeback, but he dragged himself upright using Danzo's chair. Black Zetsu made a whimpering noise, but still hadn't moved. Sasuke risked a glance at Danzo. How long do you think that will hold it? Hold it? What even is it, said Roots leader, hands already poised to begin shaping signs once more. It ignored an 8-sign paralysis seal, which should be impossible. They use those to bind Biju, for the sage's sake. Black Zetsu growled and they all saw the axe blade twitch, ever so slightly. Sasuke pried a kunao out from the corpse grip of the nearest umbu, for all the good it would do. Last time I saw that, it took a 2-man seal to do the trick. As Danzo cast him a questioning look, Sasuke shook his head and resisted the urge to show the moon symbol imprinted on his palm. Can't do it now, so don't ask. Just that simple admission was painful. He was afraid, practically naked, facing an enemy he had last sealed inside an alternate dimension, but if Naruto had been there, he knew they could have won. If Naruto, his Naruto, was gone. And the moon only ever reflected the light of the sun. He focused on reality again as White Zetsu frowned at them both. Well, you guys are just big poopy pants, no fun at all. I'm taking Senpai and going home. The plant man walked into Black Zetsu with an organic noise as the Akatsuki's spy and assassin combined once more. It glared at Sasuke and Danzo again. Just wait until Master hears about this. Sasuke threw the kunao as Danzo spat an air bullet from his mouth, only to shatter the window. Zetsu disappeared into the floor with barely a ripple and was gone. The entire fight had taken less than 5 minutes. Danzo let out a sigh, followed by a string of curses as he snatched at the remaining bandages and his graying hair in equal measure. That thing made me waste the Koda Amatsukami, damn it. Damn you. He rounded on Sasuke. How does that thing know you, Uchiha? And how could it kill 12 of my best operatives without even a whisper from their Byakugan? Sasuke blinked and allowed his eyes to cycle down to their natural dark coloring. His mouth was a grim line to match Danzo's frustrated snarl. You want to know the answer, Danzo Shimura? That's the only enemy that matters. Not stone or mist, not even war-hungry cloud. He pointed his bandaged eye socket to emphasize the point. The only thing that matters now, and the sooner you accept that, the more chances we have to stop a war that will wipe even the idea of shinobi from the land. Sasuke sighed and let his arm drop. We got lucky, he admitted. They had been spectacularly lucky. If what White Zetsu said was true, he could have been dragged off to meet Master Madara and a very hideous end by either his, Zetsu, or Pain's hand. It's a singular chakra construct, dedicated to dash. Summoning its mother, reawakening the Ten-Tails, and either ending the world, or sending off the signal that caused all those other Otsutsuki to in turn end his and Naruto's world in 40 years seemed like too much. Ending the world, basically. Danzo had noted the pause. Why? Sasuke flopped his stump in a helpless gesture. It was created to do so. Not much more to it. Now it was his turn to ask a question. How long does the jutsu from that eye last? Danzo reached up and shut a scarred eyelid with his fingers. It should be permanent. Should. Roots leader nodded wearily and began wrapping the bandages around his head. We've both been in this business long enough to know should rarely works in our favor. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. When can you use it again? Danzo looked down at the bodies and tied the wrappings tightly. You don't expect me to reveal such privileged information to Dash. I just got attacked by Black Zetsu about 10 years ahead of schedule, you scheming bastard. Tell me, how soon can you use that jutsu again, or I'll tell every genin in Konoha about Roots' recruiting methods. Sasuke regretted the words the instant he'd uttered them. Even tired, frightened, and scared, he should have been cautious, but there was no going back. He'd made plenty of threats tonight and Danzo had taken each in stride. But that last one, for some reason, had shaken the Root commander. He stared at Sasuke for a moment, fury and fear mingling on his visible face before he dropped his gaze to the bodies once more. 5 years. he admitted. A command that powerful can only be ordered once every 5 years. Despite his exhaustion, Sasuke felt his lips twitch. That was just perfect. Right on schedule after all. Danzo grunted and gestured at the demolished hospital room. I don't suppose you'll help clean this up, then. HN. They said little, but when morning came, their bodies finally gave in to exhaustion. The incoming Umbu shift found the bodies of 12 root agents stacked head to toe in the corner, with Indra Uchiha and Danzo Shimura leaning against opposite corners, deep asleep, but still clutching Kunao in their hands. Chapter 19, Conversations of Import. To his credit, Danzo told the truth about what had happened when Zetsu had attacked, and if nothing else, the construct's attack underlined the immediacy of the threat the Akatsuki posed. He and Indra disagreed on how to best approach the problem though. Danzo wanted to wage a campaign of subterfuge, assassination, bribery, and gradual delegitimization in the shadows, grinding down the Akatsuki's membership and freedom of movement over years. The organization was too small to attack with large armies, and until most of the Jinchuriki were captured, the 5 great nations would never unite out of suspicion and paranoia. Indra had seen how Obito operated best in the shadows, lurking under different masks and relying on the prestige of the name Madara Uchiha to give weight to his claims. Fortunately, the Uchiha founder was still dead, and Indra intended to be sure he stayed that way. Indra wanted to publicize as much of his information as possible, to make nations aware the ninja village system was being slowly undermined and eroded by a third-party organization. All of the ninja drawn to Akatsuki had been S-class criminals, which ran into what he and Danzo acknowledged as the Umbu problem. The Umbu problem was that as highly ranked jonin, the Umbu Black Ops undertook some of the most difficult and dangerous missions the village could offer, which meant they often found themselves fighting against S-class ninja or with odds deeply stacked against them. Simply put, situations that called for the presence of the Umbu Black Ops were also those with the highest chance of killing the Umbu Black Ops, or resolving themselves before a strike team could arrive. Usually to find 10 to 15 corpses and no sign of their quarry. Danzo had also been slightly insulted that Indra had refused the offer of a formal posting in the Umbu, choosing instead to be designated a specialist jonin for matters involving the Akatsuki. As both the head of the Umbu Black Ops and a member of Konoha's administrative council, Danzo was abusing the power of the purse granted by the latter to give far more money and materiel to the former. Though it allowed the Umbu to operate in even more secrecy and security than other hidden villages, it also meant Danzo was effectively paying himself to fulfill his own missions. And Indra knew Danzo would pay any price to advance his goals, even when a saner observer would have deemed the price too high. So no, even after last night, he would pay as much attention to Danzo as possible. Indra's resolve was strengthened when the rush of doctors, questions, and a cleanup crew had resolved with him in a new room with twice as many protective seals in a smaller window. He still had several curious visitors. The first was a teenaged silver-haired genin with glasses who'd been tasked with changing his four while the other nurses were busy. Though he presented himself with an apologetic smile and the open hands of someone who was being careful to not startle his patient, Indra trusted Kabuto Yakushi even less than Danzo. "It's only a saline solution to keep your blood sugar up, I promise," the medical trainee soothed, holding out the bag for Indra's inspection. "See, the seal is unbroken." Indra smiled in relief and nodded as Kabuto stepped forward to reach the drained bag. Like a striking hawk, Indra's arm lashed out and grabbed Kabuto's wrist, dragging the boy closer to the bed and forcing him to stare into his patient's snarling face as his Sharingan flickered to life before dimming. The medical ninja opened his mouth, but Indra shook his head. "Scream and suffer, or stay quiet like a good little spy. Your choice." Kabuto closed his mouth and his eyes sharpened behind his glasses. "Who do you work for? I've heard so many rumors these past few days, I simply had to come and see for myself. I could ask you the same thing. Stone, mist, cloud, and leaf. Root, Orochimaru, Akatsuki. You've worn so many headbands, and at such a young age. But who you report to in the end doesn't matter, not right now at least. I just want you to deliver a message." Kabuto offered a fake smile, as if he was perfectly happy to do so. "Of course, provided I'm alive to deliver it. I've even got a bit of an insurance policy." Indra looked down and saw Kabuto's free hand, glowing with the telltale sheen of a chakra scalpel, poised along the inside of his thigh. You can try to torture me with that Sharingan of yours, or any other number of horrible jutsu, but the moment you do, I will simply cut your femoral artery before I die. With all the damage you've sustained and without this saline drip I was going to give you, the blood loss would kill you in less than 10 minutes, unless this hospital has a truly exceptional medical ninja on its staff. I missed. Indra frowned. Very well then. Look into my eye and I will give you a nice little genjutsu packet that contains everything Orochimaru or Sasori need to know. I should hope I've already proven that I'm not that stupid, said Kabuto scornfully. Relay the verbal message and we'll be done with it. I'll even do you the courtesy of switching this for like I was ordered to. Those are my terms. Indra's voice was full of dark promise. Tell them that I'm coming for them. For all of them. Unless Orochimaru is willing to collaborate with me on a little project. Concerning. I'll tell him myself. I just want to make sure he's expecting me so he can break out the quality wine. The hand released him and Kabuto backed away from the bed, but the threatening shinobi from moments before was already gone. He'd returned to being just another near invalid on a hospital bed. Thank you for the help, Kabuto Yakushi. It was most appreciative. Kabuto swapped the 4 bags in silence, bowed perfunctorily, and fled the room. Indra crossed his fingers. Hopefully the little rat would scurry right back to his master and not bother with intermediaries. He'd already given Kabuto enough to think about and plenty of hints that the snake's spy network had been compromised, which should cause his most prized spy to retreat to the Sound Village as a matter of course. He returned to his finger exercises with some satisfaction, only to be interrupted by a knock on the door frame. Sasuke Uchiha stood in the doorway, looking as bored as he could, but the pretense was futile. Indra found his voice. I didn't expect to see you back so soon. They said something happened last night, so dash. I'm fine. I don't care, snapped his younger self defensively. You're going to give me a straight answer this time, without those other 2 idiots here to distract us, or to make excuses for you. Now, why did you come back? Saving the world has a nice ring to it. And also, to try and redeem myself. For what? Were you helping Itaki? Indra looked annoyed now. No, as I said, I'm hunting the man who helped Itaki kill all our relatives. I'm trying to redeem myself because it turns out I failed the people I loved the most, when I thought I'd succeeded. I can give you the gory details, but from the way you're glaring at me right now, I doubt you'd listen. Why are you so interested in me anyway? Why not just go back to your family? Indra shook his head. They died to get me here so I could make things right, so that's what I'm going to do. That includes making sure you're a decent shinobi and have your head on straight, as far as I'm concerned. What if I want you to go away and never speak to me again? Indra chuckled. That would be difficult to do when we share the same dreams. Another mystery I'd like you to answer. I honestly have no idea, so guess away. Sasuke was silent, either because he was taking the time to think or because he was pouting. Indra wasn't sure. You're not as angry as yesterday, he offered. You're not as cryptic. It's called a conversation. It took effort for Indra to rein in his annoyance. Had he really been this much of a brat when he was young? He was forced to concede that he probably was. A few calming breaths later and he plunged back in. Dr. Ontoba said he won't discharge me for a month or 2, so we'll have more time to get used to each other. If you want, I could get an apartment, stay away from the Uchiha estate. Sasuke looked nonplussed for a moment, but returned his face to the smooth blank expression he was working so hard to project. Why would you do that? You're an Uchiha, you belong in the Uchiha district. I was under the impression from this conversation that you never wanted to see my face again. That was a question, not a statement. I need someone to teach me more about the Sharingan. Internally, Indra cheered. He wasn't Uchiha non grata yet. So where do we stand? You don't, you're stuck in that bed. I'm going to believe that story you told me yesterday, on one condition. Name it. Any more sordid clan history you want to air out? Because I've had about my fill for one lifetime. Sasuke sounded exhausted and emotionally drained, so Indra immediately shifted to high alert, internal alarms howling like the 10 tails. What brought this on? A lot. Indra mentally ran through the list of all the possible people who could have told him about Itachi. It was a short list, none of whom would have had any reason to appear to a 10-year-old Sasuke and tell him the truth. He decided to bluff with something generic to see if Sasuke needed to say more. Family can be tough. I was the Uchiha bloodline enforcer, so I've learned more than most about the mistakes a clan can make. The Hyuga and the Aburame have plenty of skeletons in their closet too, if that helps. Sasuke turned to look out the window, which conveniently hid his face from Indra. They were both probing now, trying to get the other to divulge whatever heavy weight lay on them first. Indra kept pushing. You'll have to be more specific, Sasuke. I can't help if I don't know what's troubling you. His younger self flung up his hands. I don't know. You, my parents, everything. What am I supposed to do with that? What should Naruto? Do you know what I'm even talking about? Indra felt his mind kick into high gear, whizzing through dozens of possibilities in the span of seconds and came up with absolutely nothing. I don't, he admitted. There was a long silence as he waited and Sasuke wrestled with how to say it out loud. My mom loved someone else before my father, if she ever loved him at all. Indra's remaining eyebrow disappeared into his hairline. And how did you lean this? The pink-haired girl you met yesterday, Sakura Harano, has been helping me with research. Trying to find out more about my mother, about you, as well. We found some Akimika's diary from the Third Great Ninja War and our Umbu guards told us the rest of the story. Awfully chatty for Umbu guards, said Indra, even as he knew with absolute certainty who the only real candidate for that position could be. The third Hokage really was too clever by half. He's been useful, said Sasuke shortly. Indra nodded absently and picked up his water glass to stall for time. How is Naruto involved in this? You're the one who asked me to find him, so this is really all your fault. Guilty as charged. Sasuke took a deep breath. His mom and my mom were together. Indra choked on his water and began a coughing fit that lasted several minutes as he pounded weakly on his chest with his remaining arm. I see, he said weakly, how that would be upsetting to you both. For what it's worth, this is news to me. Well, it seemed to be pretty common knowledge from what we read, Mr. Uchiha Bloodline Guardian. So, any other world-altering secrets you want to throw at me, get them out of the way. It's not like things can get much worse, they're all already dead anyway. Well, shit. He obviously couldn't tell Sasuke the truth now. It would shatter him completely, and that was if he even believed his mysterious new uncle. However, he also remembered Itachi's parting words, how he should have told Sasuke the truth from the very beginning. The longer he waited, the more damage he would do until Sasuke dove deep into the curse of hatred, all for revenge on one party or another. Then, an idea occurred to him. It was dangerous, and would put Indra in life-threatening peril with regularity, but it might be the only way to split the difference. He was already stained with failure, what was one more moral compromise in the face of Sarada's disappointment? If you heard something happen last night, do you know who was with me? Sasuke shrugged. The guy Naruto threw a kunao at. Danzo. Somehow Indra wasn't surprised. He and I have much to discuss and potentially a great deal of work to do together. Sasuke looked skeptical. You're really good enough to join the Umbu Black Ops. I used to be better than them, but that's not the point. The point is, Danzo's up to something. He's always up to something, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. I don't know what it is yet, but when I find out, I'll tell you first, no matter what it is. Sound fair? His younger self turned back towards him, arms crossed and expression still neutral. Before even the Hokage. Indra nodded, not trusting his voice to speak the lie. Good. Now get some rest, I can't wait to kick your butt in the dojo once you get out of the hospital. Despite himself, Indra smiled. Can't wait to kick yours. They shared a brief look of mutual respect and then Sasuke strode out. Eagle's head poked around the door a few moments later with a lunch tray in tow, which he slid onto the bedside table. Danzo's up to something, huh? He always is, that's his job. But yes, once I'm out of this place, he and I will have words. Eagle was silent, but Indra knew he'd made his point. Deal with one problem, create two more, he muttered to himself. This is going to be such a drag. Across town, Shikamaru Nara's ears burned. Chapter 20, Dark Thoughts. Obito Uchiha was mad, driven by loss, despair, and several cursed compulsion seals Madara had etched on his remaining inner organs, but even he was not capable, or willing to work 24/7. That was what the Zetsus were for, after all. For once, he was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sitting on top of Madara's statue in the final valley and eating lunch. He didn't need to eat anymore, but the taste of the rice balls and the spices always made him feel a little more human and a little less like an abomination against life fused with a living tumor, working on a plan to subjugate all life on the planet. Obito Uchiha didn't like himself very much. His quiet was spoiled by two vast green jaws emerging out of the stone next to him, followed by a grasping white hand and panicked exclamations. His lunch immediately discarded, Obito stood, grasped Zetsu's hand and pulled with all his considerable strength. Zetsus were normally able to move through the earth and the most solid of substances like water, an ability which made them incredibly useful as spies and assassins, but now it felt like he was pulling the creature free from hardening cement. With a groan of effort, Obito put his back into the motion and heaved Zetsu free of the stone, which the plant man promptly collapsed upon, covered in sap. "What is this? What's happened to you?" Obito's voice was low and suspicious, the spiral mask already back on his face. He took in Zetsu's pose for a moment and stared in shock. While the white half of the plant man was gasping and showed the signs of some massive effort, the inky half of black Zetsu remained frozen in place, one shadowy arm raised in an axe shape, just above shoulder height. What happened to him? White Zetsu wrenched itself away from its counterpart with a sucking sound and rolled onto its back to look up at him. "That rumor you sent us to look into, the one about the mystery Uchiha? It's true. He's alive, and knows far more than he should." The mad Uchiha bent down and turned black Zetsu this way and that, studying the frozen form. "Is this permanent?" White Zetsu gave his counterpart a worried expression. "How should I know? He hasn't moved or said anything for the last 2 days. Seems pretty permanent to me." Obito cursed and kicked at the black form. It rolled sideways until its outstretched arm halted its momentum with a clatter. "Who did this?" "The old man in the leaf," gasped Zetsu. "The one who let you in to mess up the Uchiha clan. He tried some sealing jutsu, but we know that doesn't work on Zetsu-senpai, then he did something with that Sharingan eye of his and senpai stopped moving." Obito clenched his hands and strode away to look over the landscape of the final valley. "And you let them live? They were really scary, master. I barely escaped with senpai, you know I'm not very good at fighting, right?" They were silent as Obito thought, the wind whistling through their robes and spilling down into the valley below. Even in his fury and uncertainty, a part of Obito still marveled at the view. It really was spectacular, a landscape altered by the fury of 2 shinobi alone. A testament to the power he too could possess, if he chose to. "We will leave them alone for now, see what develops. The Leaf's actions in the coming months will tell us much about what this Indra Uchiha knows and what he intends to do. I intend to take advantage of the slightest mistake he makes. What should I do with senpai? Prop him up in Madara's cave, next to the Gedo statue. If that cannot heal him, then he will serve as a potent reminder for us to not underestimate our enemies." White Zetsu sank into the ground, dragging his frozen partner along with a sigh, but Obito paid them no heed. "Well then, Indra Uchiha," he murmured. "Let's see how you intend to play our little game. I'm most curious to see what you do next." Deep into the land of rice paddies, Kabuto was similarly calm. He'd ran hard for 3 days across wooded and mountainous terrain before it fell away into the terraced fields of the land of rice paddies. Lands which paid tribute, willing or not, to Lord Orochimaru. Back in friendly territory, he absently swapped headbands back to the winged note symbol common in the area. Not that it mattered to him, but it would make it less likely the guards would attack first and debrief him later, and Lord Orochimaru did not tolerate delays. He launched across a field and landed in a small copse of trees on the other side, which foretold the forest deeper in, which in turn hid Orochimaru's most secure hideout. His fundamental base of operations for the Sound Village, experiments, and the closest thing Kabuto had to a home in a long time. The Sound Spy waved an absent greeting at 2 black and purple-clad Chunin, who saluted back as he landed in front of them. Where is Lord Orochimaru? I have critical intelligence he needs to hear as soon as possible. He had no time and no inclination for preamble now. One man jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Down there, sir, in lab, 17B, the Spider Boy's nest. Kabuto smirked. Playing with his food again? It's a nasty habit, someone really should try to break him of it. The two sound ninja very carefully did not look at each other. If that's what you think, sir, said the second, blandly. We have a patrol to complete, so. Kabuto, tired of the teasing, nodded, and they took off. They make it so easy, he thought to himself. It's like stealing candy from a wind monk. After 10 minutes of walking through packed tunnel walls, crowded with shinobi and stacks of equipment, Kabuto finally reached Lab 17B. He knew the patrolling ninja had been correct, partially due to the lack of nearby ninja, but mostly because of the muffled screaming. He put his ear to the door. It wouldn't do to interrupt his master mid-sentence, so he'd wait for an appropriate pause. Now Kidomaru, stay focused. Tell me again, what is the tensile strength of your webbing? GHH 520. Rotate that joint 5 degrees forward and hold it there. 520 what? Joules per cubic meter, sir. Good, good. Kabuto took the moment to knock as Orochimaru's annoyed voice hissed out of the keyhole. Who is it? Yakushi Kabuto, my lord. I've returned from Konoha personally with some urgent news. Excellent, you're just in time to consult on my newest creation. Come in. Kabuto opened the door and closed it behind him. Orochimaru was bent over a stainless steel table, covered in a mask, gloves, and with his hair bound into a tight ponytail behind him. The motionless and lumpy form of Kidomaru lay beneath him, semi-conscious. Come forward and look at this ligament connection. The spy and medical ninja put on a mask of his own and bent forward to examine the flayed meat of Kidomaru's shoulder. What had once been a single pair of arms was now 3, attached at the undae subscapularis muscle, distorting the ninja's profile and multiplying his fighting prowess. Orochimaru pointed with a bloody finger. I duplicated the transverse humeral ligaments along 30-degree angles and stretched the synovial membrane so the arms could easily synchronize. Still, it's something of a radical departure. Do you think they will hold under stress? Kabuto made an absent noise as his eyes traced the muscles, tendons, and ligaments down into their limbs. It all seems in order, Lord Orochimaru. Has his nervous system acclimated to the new inputs? Orochimaru's eyes gleamed, which meant he was smiling behind his mask. Oh yes. When I explained the risks to dear Kidomaru, he positively volunteered to perform the experiment without any anesthetic. I've even been having him use his new arms to move the old ones as I work. He's already such an excellent multitasker, aren't you, Kidomaru? The Kumo clan member groaned and gave them 3 trembling thumbs up, and Kabuto watched in fascination as the muscles moved underneath his gaze. With all respect, Lord Orochimaru, I wouldn't have him lifting boulders for a few months, but time and chakra usage should strengthen the bonds enough to fuse his new limbs seamlessly with the old. Are the limbs donated, or cloned, out of curiosity? Orochimaru made to brush his hair back from his face, only to be reminded it wasn't there. A habitual gesture of pride. Cloned, of course. I couldn't risk tissue rejection, especially when dealing with such a unique clan's bodily secretions. His sticky gold armor wouldn't work if it covered only part of his body, would it? No, I mixed a few of his tissue samples with deer shins and grew these last week. Now there's a volunteer who has allowed me a truly infinite canvas to work with. The snake man sighed in satisfaction, as if he'd eaten a large meal. Now, as we sew this up, what was so urgent you felt you had to break cover and come back here in person? Kabuto took a needle in one hand and gathered green healing chakra in the other. As they worked and Kidomaru let out infrequent grunts of pain, he explained. The sudden arrival of Indra Uchiha in a very public manner, the consternation among high-ranking ninja, and the scramble by Dr. Ontoba to save the man's life. Kabuto had assisted him in that operation, mostly as a supply gopher, but he knew it had been a close thing. The comings and goings of mysterious shinobi at all hours of the night, including the Hokage and root agents. The massacre of those same root agents and Shimura Danzo's surprising testimony in favor of the Uchiha. The warnings Indra had given him, that he, and possibly Orochimaru's entire spy network inside the leaf had been compromised, and a worrying amount of knowledge about his former subjugation under the Akatsuki. The threat and enticement, that Indra could and would destroy Orochimaru and the Akatsuki both unless Orochimaru cooperated with the mysterious new Uchiha on a project. With 15 years of experience reading others and calling bluffs, Kabuto was convinced Indra believed what he was saying. As outlandish as it sounded, this man could very well have that kind of power, especially considering Orochimaru's own failure at capturing Itachi Uchiha. Kabuto had left Misuki to his fate, not willing to push his luck approaching a Konoha teacher, and departed to inform his master. Orochimaru was silent until the last of Kodomaru's hair thread had been tied off and snipped. Kabuto's medical ninjutsu sealed the wound shut and allowed the thread to secure the many connections and additions Orochimaru had made to one of his bodyguards. Kabuto, did you find this man credible and sincere, when he spoke to you?
Yes, my lord.
Very much so. He also said for you to expect him, and to break out the good wine when he arrived, so he at least expects to be welcomed. I'm sure he knows of your desire for the sherry non, though, for he described himself to multiple parties as the Uchiha clan's secret bloodline guardian. Were you ever aware of such a position? The snake ninja stripped off his surgical attire and threw it in a nearby wastebin, as Kabuto saw he looked pensive. It was mentioned once or twice, but Fugaku always said it was redundant in the modern era. An effective lie, that would allow him to deny responsibility for an unacknowledged Uchiha if he was caught. Quite possible, to be sure, and if this Indra Uchiha seeks my counsel, he must have something to bargain with. A hungry look came over Orochimaru's face. We must speak to him as soon as possible, Kabuto. Regardless of your cover, return to the Leaf Village and provide him with directions to the southern hideout at once. His spy looked unhappy, so Orochimaru grasped his shoulders and brought them face to face, golden slitted eyes staring into dark ones. You must do this for me, Kabuto, it represents a rare opportunity to dash. The moment Kabuto had met his eyes, the spy's face twitched violently in a seizure. Or a genjutsu compulsion. Orochimaru let go and leaped backward down the corridor, arms up in a defensive stance. My lord dash. Kabuto began to grasp it, then claw at his face, flinging aside his precious glasses, which clattered to the ground. It burns. It burns. It burns. Black fire erupted from his eyes and spread across his face. The pleas soon devolved into wordless howls of pain as the spy's face, then his throat, melted away like wax. Amaterasu cursed Orochimaru, sketching out a seal in blood on the rocky floor and slamming his arms and chakra into it. Kabuto collapsed to the ground, hands and head smoking as the black fire flowed away from him and into the seal. But it was too late. Kabuto was fading fast, the tissue damage too severe, and the shock too overwhelming and unexpected for the medical ninja to try healing himself. Orochimaru's mind raced as he considered the nearby labs, their ingredients, and patients, if any could help salvage his most valued spy. Root experience was hard to come by after all, but to lose it to the Amaterasu. He had only survived Itaka's retaliatory attacks through his own extinct clan's substitution jutsu, which shed one body for another, at the cost of a very large amount of chakra. Kabuto had no such direct recourse, and perhaps 20 seconds left to live. He felt a presence and a snake reared from his sleeve as his remaining hand played green healing chakra over his subordinate's face, some of which was scorched down to the skull. Get me the jar of glutaraldehyde in Lab 17D, I need to preserve his synaptic connections. It's the jar 2 across from the fanged Inyazuka skull on the far wall and has a greenish tincture. Go. Kidomaru, covered only in blood-soaked bandages, swayed on his feet and his arms hung limply at his sides. Still, he staggered off in the right direction. Orochimaru ignored the wretch and poured lightning and wind chakra into his subordinate's skull. The first would continue the brain's neuroelectricity, while the second would provide oxygen to the neurons themselves on a microscopic level. Not his normal method of preserving a brain, but Kabuto had certain knowledge he couldn't afford to lose, that could very well be lost in death. Reanimation was a possibility, but despite his test run against Sasori 6 months ago, he hadn't worked out all the subtleties of identity reconstitution. The Sunin gritted his teeth and hissed in frustration even as he felt Kabuto's vitals stabilize slightly. Oh, Indra Uchiha wanted to meet him then, Well, no Uchiha was strong enough to stand against both him and the Sound Ninja 5. Oh, there would be a reckoning, and soon. Hundreds of miles away, Indra Uchiha felt his chakra flicker slightly and he smiled. It had taken him a very long time, and countless obliterated clones to rediscover the technique Itaki had used on him as a failsafe, but it had been worth it. It had worked on Obito, in his past life, and just now, it had apparently worked on Kabuto as well. Orochimaru could survive nearly anything, including a Bijudama, but his spy was far less durable. One potential problem out of the way and the first source of reanimation jutsu to go. Orochimaru himself would have plenty of time to consider Indra, and he was fine with that. Let the Sunin scheme and come up with contingency after contingency. Indra knew what he wanted most, how to stop him getting it, and, failing that, how to exterminate the snake. He breathed out and passed another sheaf of intelligence to Inoichi in the corner, some scraps on Mist's current 4th Mizukage. Things were already going pretty well. Check the description for the links to the author.